Ladies and gentlemen, the Baseball Hall of Fame, the Football Hall of Fame, and the Hockey Hall of Fame should consider this. Should individual teams from certain years get in the Hall of Fame in toto? Well, for me, the 1976 Cincinnati Reds, the greatest team of any major league I ever saw in the 1970s, certainly deserves so. Only the Pittsburgh Steelers could match this team for depth and quality of play. Now, we're going to be talking about the greatest of those 1970s teams, of course, the Reds that won 109 games in regular season and playoffs and went 7-0 in the postseason. The Reds entered the year as the reigning world champions, beating Boston in 7 games in 75. The Reds dominated the league all season and won their second consecutive NL West title with a record of 102-6, finishing 10 games ahead of the surging LA Dodgers, who dominated the division the rest of the decade. With the best record in baseball, they went on to defeat the Phillies in the 76 Championship Series in 3 straight games to reach the World Series, and then proceeded to win the title in 4 straight games over the New York Yankees before Reggie Jackson arrived in 77. Still a good team. They were the third and most recent NL team to achieve this distinction, the first since the 1922 New York Giants. They drew, get this, 2.6 million fans in their home games at Riverfront, an all-time franchise attendance record. As of 2023, the Reds are the only team in baseball history to sweep through an entire postseason in a divisional era. And again, the only thing it compared to is nothing can compare because even the Islanders lost. Now, the big offseason situation, they traded Joaquin Arnar, of all people, the Astros for players to be named later. And, of course, Clay Carroll was shifted as well. Now, that campaign, the Big Red Machine was at the height of its power with 4 future Hall of Famers, Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, Tony Perez, and manager Sparky Anderson, the future MLB all-time hits leader Pete Rose, and a notable supporting lineup including Dave Concepcion on shortstop, Ken Griffey, Cesar Geronimo, and George Foster in the outfield, as well as Dan Dreesen being the 4th outfielder, top player as well. Now, the Reds retained their NL pennant by winning the NLCS in 3 games over the Phillies and winning the Yankees 4 straight, become the only second team to sweep a World Series from the Yankees, following the 63 Dodgers. By sweeping both the Phillies and Yankees, again, they became the first and only team to have a perfect postseason since the league championship series started in '69. Joe Morgan was the NL's most valuable player for the 2nd straight season, and Johnny Bench was the World Series MVP. And he said in published reports he wanted a better result than he did in '75. Now, to celebrate the National League's 100th anniversary, the Reds and several other teams adopted pillbox-style caps. So kind of a throwback that year. Now, the Dodgers were the only contenders at 92 and 70, but the third-place Astros ended up 22 games behind. Now, Cincinnati did very well against teams in their own division. The 2 teams that really gave them a hard time, of course, were the Mets and the Phillies because they played a similar style. And, of course, St. Louis. So they really dominated their NL West opponents. Now, the roster, tremendous from top to bottom. Santo Alcala, Jack Billingham, Pedro Bombon, Pat Darcy, Raleigh Eastwood, Don Gullett, Joe Henderson, Rick Hinton, Will McEnany in relief, Gary Nolan, Fred Norman, Marty Semiento, and Pat Zachary. Catcher's bench was backed up by Plummer and Werner. Infielders were Concepcion, Dreesen, Doug Flynn, Joe Morgan, Tony Perez, Pete Rose. Outfielders again, Dreesen played some games. Ed Armbruster, Bob Bailey, George Foster, Cesar Geronimo, Ken Griffey Sr., Mike Lum, and the underrated Joel Youngblood. Manager was Sparky Anderson. And of all people, they had their key coach was the great home run hitter Ted Kluszewski. Now, he went 10-7 in April, 18-10 in May, 18-12 in June, a big 20-9 in July, 18-11 in August, 16-10 in September, and 2-1 in October. Now, as it stands right now, the lineup has no parallel to me in National League history, and I'll tell you why. So just listen to this lineup, ladies and gentlemen, from top to bottom. Johnny Bench that year, hit .234, but with 16 homers and 74 RBIs, played injured most of the season, a gutty performance. Perez hit 90 RBIs again, 19 and 91, but Joe Morgan had 320 average, 27 homers, 111 RBIs with 60 stolen bases. But Pete Rose put out some big numbers on third base that year, 215 hits, 130 runs, 323 average, 10 homers, 63 RBIs, and 9 stolen bases. Concepcion batted .281, 9 homers and 69 RBIs, 21 stolen bases. George Foster in his breakout year, 29 homers, 121, 306 average, 17 stolen bases, and 172 hits. Cesar Geronimo, another big year for him, 307, 49 RBIs, 22 stolen bases. And Ken Griffey, a very underrated, 6 homers, 74 RBIs, a leading 336 National League average. Again, 74 RBIs and 34 stolen bases. Dreesen had 7 homers, 44 RBIs, 14 stolen bases. Doug Flynn in partial play hit it for 283. Plummer, 248. Mike Lum, 20 big RBIs. Bob Bailey, the former Montreal Expo and Dodger, 6 homers, 23 RBIs, hitting 298. Joel Youngblood in a partial season, 193. Now that year, no 20 games winners, but get this, 6 starters that year, ladies and gentlemen. Gary Nolan, 15-9. Pat Zachary, 14-7. Fred Norman, 12-7. Jack Billingham, 12-10. Santo Alcala, 11-4. And Don Gullett, before he went over to the Yankees, 11-3. Now, Raleigh Eastwood had 26 saves, going 11-5. Pedro Borbon, 4-3, 8 saves. Will McAnally, 2-6 with 7 saves. Of course, came on in the postseason. Now, what really stands out for me, ladies and gentlemen, is how he dominated both playoffs. Against the Phillies, 3 games straight, they scored at least 6 runs in those 3 games, 6-3, 6-2, and 7-6, and basically dominated from start to finish. For some reason, he started on the road. But in the World Series, they won. He had a very, very, again, strong result, winning 5-1, 4-3, 6-2, and 7-2. And each game, again, less than 2 hours and 40 minutes. They really, really, really dominated. Now, awards and honors that year, and there were many. Johnny Bench won the Babe Ruth Award, and it was at the MVP, of course. Pete Rose won the Roberto Clemente Award. At the All-Star game, Bench, Morgan, Rose, Concepcion, and Foster were starters. Tony Perez was a reserve, with Ken Griffey as a reserve player as well. Now, what was kind of weird, ladies and gentlemen, their AA affiliate was in Trois-Rivières, Quebec. Indianapolis Indians obviously were the main one, but they had the Tampa Tarpons, Eugene Emeralds, and the Billings, Montana Mustangs. A lot of good players in there, of course. Now, what really stood out for me, ladies and gentlemen, no matter what part of Canada you're in 1976, the Reds were the number 1 team. You would think the Yankees or the Red Sox, but the Reds, they had played Montreal. I think it was a series of contests at pre-Olympic Stadium. And for some reason, ladies and gentlemen, it was the highest rated games in Montreal Expos history up until what I call the Steve Rogers golden era of the late 70s, where Valentine and Cromartie and Dawson, later Reigns, were around. But watching the Reds back then, it'd be 1-1 after the first inning, and you said, oh, well, somebody's going to do something. It's going to be Rose or Griffey or Perez. You could stop 5 of them, but you couldn't stop 9 of them. The other 4 would come about. And the only comparison I can give, if the Blue Jays ever get their lineup straightened out with injuries and stuff, they're like that, because the parallels like Rose, Morgan, and Concepcion, Biggio, Guerrero, and Bichette. A lot of comparison. Good young players knew how to play the game well. And I consider that a 5-star team because they motivated other teams in the NLL to be better because you couldn't beat the Reds. So they had to adjust. So that's the Big Red Machine. Thanks for listening. Give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share. Bye.